This is episode 8 of the Hybrid Coaching Podcast with James Kelly and Anthony Parasini. Just want to say a quick congratulations to James, who took third place at the HYROX World Championships 2 weeks ago. In this episode, I will be solo as James is on a flight back from Europe to Australia, his home that he hasn't been to in about a year. And I will be discussing the history of HYROX, where it's gone, and lessons to be learned from it, as well as my favorite race and my most special race to have watched. Let's make hybrid fitness work for you. How's it going, everyone? Today I am solo. No JK for this week. He probably won't be on for next week either, which means you get a whole lot of me doing solo. It took a little bit for me to figure out which topics to cover for this one, but I'm going to go with the history of HYROX here. And I'm going with HYROX because HYROX is the sport of hybrid fitness. Hybrid fitness has a longer history than just HYROX, but hybrid fitness, it's been around a while. It's originally probably strength and conditioning and athletics and a lot of combinations of just running or conditioning and the dichotomy of two separate things coming together into one. That's what we'll define our hybrid fitness as. But the sport of HYROX is the sport of hybrid fitness, and it's really grown the last couple years. So if you really want to take advantage of going into the future in your races, whether you're an athlete or just trying to complete a HYROX, sometimes it's really good to understand the background of it, because even though you don't have the experience from starting, even if it's your first race or you're just moving on, one of the best things you can do is gain experience through the anecdotes of others, right? So you can learn from others' mistakes. It's not as good as first-hand experience, but it's second-hand experience. So getting that experience can really help propel you in any race, because you didn't experience it firsthand, but you might be in your race and you come across something and you're like, oh, I remember this because this person experienced it and they told me about it. And so here's what I can do from here. And that can really help. So I'm going to just kind of do that with the history of HYROX, and you can learn how it developed, what it started as, and where it can go. A lot of this is just my own personal experience with the sport and where we started with my wife, and then also listening to some of the people I've talked to in the sport that are higher up, like Mo and Mintra and Christian, because early on they were really involved, and they still are really involved, but early on when they were really involved, they would show up to the races and we would be able to talk. It was actually Christian who, in late 2021, when I found out Lauren was pregnant, we had been to Dallas, I believe, was the first race we went to, and I saw Christian on an assault runner, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said he's running 5K a day for a race, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do that too. And from that point on, I ran or rode 5K a day until Bay is what I had called it. So I had basically done a 5K every single day of Lauren's pregnancy, right up, and actually even the day her water broke, I even did a 5K. So right up until then. So I thank Christian for that. He gave me that idea and I was able to run with it. But what I want to cover here is the history of HYROX. So we'll get into some of those stories. But we're going to jump in kind of in the middle, not really in the middle, but the first couple chapters in, and then I'll move back and learn about the preface that I have learned about through my own experiences with them, and then we'll move forward from there. So our first race that we attended was the first race in the United States. It was called Season 2 of HYROX, and it started out where the reigning champions, MK Solander and Lucas Storath, were going to be in Miami in October of 2019. And we learned through Yancey Culp about this race that was going to be happening. And we weren't, it sounded like a lot of fun, like it really was up Lauren's alley, but it wasn't something that we had originally intended to go with. I believe when we first learned about it, I was in my 52 days of being unable to walk, and then I had back surgery. We didn't know if I'd be able to travel, and I don't think she wanted to go alone. So we ended up saying yes and going. It was about a month and a half after my back surgery, so maybe 2 months, and it was good. We got to get there. Nobody really knew Lauren, but Yancey got her a ticket into the race. I had looked up hotels, and I found one that I thought was close enough, but it was about a half mile away from the venue. And that half mile away from the venue was to the back side of the venue, and so we had to walk all the way around it. And so it ended up being about a 20 to 25 minute walk from our hotel to get into the actual convention center. And it was hot and muggy down in Florida. But lessons learned that taught us for future races kind of where we don't want to be. At the time, Lauren had ran a lot, but she was actually really strong. She was probably at the height of her CrossFit career, and she was really strong. So we knew that like she was going to be able to beat anybody on the stations, and the wall balls weren't going to be a factor for her. But for a lot of these other athletes, they were runners and they were small, and you get to the first start line, and before we got there, HYROX had announced, we had started following them, and they announced, I think, $5,000 to anybody that could beat their world champions, which were MK and Lucas. But I don't think they said the world champions. I think they said they had to beat their world records. And so we got into there, and the race starts. Great fun race at the very beginning. And MK comes out. MK and Faye Stenning were pretty fast, so they came out. They were running hard, and Lauren was in the leader of the second pack, I think, and she was in third. And they get to the sleds, and the sleds were heavy. And this was back when there was a 25-meter section, so you had to go all the way down 25 meters and then all the way back 25 meters, and you just did down and back. It wasn't down back like it is nowadays with 12.5-meter sections. So they were big sleds, and she gets there, and they were heavy. But she looks over, and I remember her telling me this afterwards, that she saw MK pushing the sled, and she's like, how is this little girl pushing the sled and I can't? And then she really started to dig into it, realized she was able to get it. I think she came out of the station second or third still. And it went really well kind of for the rest of the race. She picked up some of the strategies in that race, but at the end of the race, Faye Stenning came into the wall balls probably 3 minutes ahead of the rest of the field. It was a very big lead, and Lauren was running in third. She was in no man's land, and we actually just thought, okay, she's gonna finish in third. That's not bad for the first race. Like, awesome. She gets to the wall balls, and Faye was struggling with the wall balls. Imke was okay at them, and Lauren ends up passing Faye, but wasn't close enough to Imke to catch her, and ends up finishing just behind Imke in second place for Miami. But her first time was 71 minutes and 55 seconds. If you think about that from where the women's field is now, Lauren's improved by almost 14 minutes since her first race, which that's, the top of the sport. But everybody can see that the progression of the sport can go pretty far. And if you just talk about the remaining events that came up, there were 2 more events she went to with the big sleds and the long 25-meter sections. And so that's what we had started practicing. The times back then, it was always impressive to see a woman break 70. And I believe Lucas was the first one to break 60 for the men, but Hunter almost did in his first race in Miami there. He won the race, but he didn't break the world record, so he didn't get the $5,000 bonus until like his second or third race. I think his second race in New York, actually. So, big event, lots of fun. It wasn't obviously as big as it is now, but it was really growing. And when the world shut down in March of 2020, they had to cancel the rest of the season, and that's when they had the Elite 12. They tried doing like a home series in the very first virtual championships of fitness, and then they had the Elite 12, and then they did another VCF, and then the Invite in Dallas. And this kind of just goes into how you structure your season, because when it was like all shifted around like this, people would have to train year round for this event. And now you want to be generally fit year round. You want to have a high level of base fitness, but to really attack a season, you don't go into the season at your peak, right? You kind of ramp up to get there, and you don't really start that until a couple months out from Worlds. It's not even the 7-month season or the 6-month season. You want to really build your fitness for a long time, especially after coming off of Worlds. So just for example, Worlds ended about 2 weeks ago. We're going to spend about 6 months in general fitness mode, and there might be 2 majors in that. And not general fitness, but like improving all aspects of her fitness, and everybody else we train too. JK will experience it, Kate Davey, Lauren Griffith. They're all going to experience a higher level of general fitness before we ramp into the season. And so the way the season is structured, that's kind of what you want to do. Now, I got a little bit off topic from what I was talking about, which was the history of HYROX, and so I'll get back into that. But going from that first race into the Elite 12, everybody just kind of noticed that like you learn through the race some things that you need to do. One of the big things that we learned in that is that, the race isn't over just because people are getting to the wall balls earlier. You know, you don't know what station somebody is going to be struggling with. And that was reinforced in Lauren's second race in Chicago, where she actually came out and was like, I'm going to see how fast I can go, and had a really great sled push, a not so great sled pull, and was doing okay, but she was 4th coming into the wall balls. But Faye, and I believe it was either Morgan Schultz or I forget who else. I think Morgan actually ended up in 4th. So Lauren was doing her wall balls in the Chicago race, and she ended up almost catching Faye, but she had slowed down going into the wall balls, thinking that she was set in her position at 4th. And then, so to come into the last station 3 minutes behind the leader, and then have a strong wall ball station, and she actually finished in 3rd in that race, but was only 18 seconds out of 1st place. So she'd improved her overall race time, but it really showed like, keep the pressure on the entire race, because you never know when you're going to have that opportunity to overtake someone. You don't know where their breaking point is. And then that was reinforced in Dallas. She ran a lot of the race on her own, which was her 3rd race, but then she just kept the pressure on the whole time, and that's where she finished nearly 8 minutes ahead of 2nd place. And that time was the first time she broke 70. She finished 68 minutes, 56 seconds, which at the time was the 4th fastest time of the season. And it earned her spot into the Elite 12 because of that, because they took the 5 fastest times plus 1 wild card. And that was the Elite 12 on both men and women. It was always the 5 fastest times and 1 wild card. And so that's how she earned her way in. And then, but some of those lessons you can really learn. So the next time you're in your race, if you feel like you have a bad station, that's not going to make or break you. So don't give up after it. Just keep going. It might not be the final race you want, but you learn information. You understand where, hey, that was hard. I need to pick it up next time there, or I need to practice this more, or that was a hard station for me this time. I don't want it to be a hard station for me next time. Um, and so that's kind of what you want to do as you progress. And then one thing we do each season is we kind of pick one station or two stations, or there's 9 total movements in this event. There's the running and then the 8 stations. And so we kind of pick 1 or 2 of those each year to just really improve on. And what you do is you make sure you don't neglect the other portions. But if you have a high level of overall fitness, a high level of overall strength, then you're going to be able to maintain those stations at a competitive level, and then really dive in and improve on either things that need to be improved on or strengthening your strengths. So there's 2 ways to go about that. You either shore up your weaknesses or you strengthen your strengths, and then you got to lean into one of those during your races. So back to HYROX, just teaching us lessons as we get into the history here. At the very beginning, it was Christian, and I believe Mintra first came up with the states, so Christian and Mo, and they helped grow it. I believe Christian was part of Ironman in the 1980s when it really started to grow, and Mo is a 3-time Olympic medal winner, I believe a 3rd and 2 firsts, so he has 2 Olympic gold medals for field hockey and 1 3rd place, so very high level athlete in himself. Mintra trained a whole bunch of military. I don't know exactly, you'd have to go back and listen to some of her things, but coming from where they're at and understanding their vision for it can really help you see where either the sport is going or what they're trying to get out of the race itself. So that's why when we talk about understanding the history, it's very important to take a look back, rewatch old races. And just in that vein, I thought I'd share what some of the lessons learned that you can get, but also what my favorite races are. So I've been to quite a few of them, not all of them. I believe Lauren's done 27 or 28 total races now. And some of my favorite ones to watch where there was like a great race in it, I'll go over that, but also I can go over what like the most special race to me is. And I'm going to start with that. So my most special race has to be the Las Vegas World Championships. And I know it's Lauren's favorite race, but it was very special. Since we've been in the sport and known about it, Mintra actually let me on the floor, and I would stand at the corners in different areas and be able to just talk to Lauren and monitor her the whole time while she was pregnant and going. And it was great of them to be able to do that. There were no modification. There were modifications in terms of like how Lauren did burpees and stuff, but she still met the standard for everything. So efficacy was maintained. She'd still have to go down, touch her chest to the ground. When you have a belly that's carrying a child, it's like a ball in front of you. You can't roll down and hit your thighs and your chest at the same time. So when the definition of the burpee at that time was touch your chest to the ground and then stand up, she was still able to do that. So she got through the burpees and everything. She started out just like she likes to. And it was a really special race for me and for her, being able to be there. I don't know if anybody else has any shots of it, but there's one point, I believe, when she's doing the burpees and the lunges, I'm actually standing behind one of the columns. And it's really cool. And I don't know if anybody from HYROX actually listens to this, but it'd be awesome if we had a coaches lane where coaches of the Elite 15 athletes, at least during, major races or world championships, would have a little zone where they could run between the run track and be able to, cheer for their athletes or help them count or something to maintain and be able to still see them at the stations. Just like a little side one that with a coach's badge or something. I think that'd be really great. And that's, wishful thinking on my part. But that's probably definitely the most special race. Everybody was really supportive. She ended up running. And actually, if anybody goes back and watches that she was not the only pregnant woman in that race. Rachel Vonderak, previously Rachel Schreiber, was also in that race. And I think she was 4 or 5 months pregnant as well. And she had a great race. I think she might have overheated and had to pull out during the race, which was a safety thing, which was great. But she started the race and was doing very well as well. So it was a special race to watch. It was a special race to see. During that time, we had made friends with some of the other athletes that are still in the sport today. I'd say Viola Oberlander and Linda Meyer, Chris Rogowski. There were a ton of athletes. Camila Massa, she was in that race. There were a ton of athletes in that race that we still see today, and it was great watching them compete. And I believe in that race, Viola was the two-time runner-up in 2020 and 2021, and she was probably the favorite going into that race. She was in first or maybe second coming out of the farmer carry, I want to say, and she ended up running an extra lap. She had such a big lead on the field. She ran an extra lap and then came into the lunges in like seventh. So that was pretty tough to see her do that. I remember being on the inside, and she passed the in, and I thought she was supposed to go in, and then she turned the corner, and then I saw, I think it was Chris or Linda come in, and I tried to shout to Viola, but she was already far away. But that was tough, but she did really well in that race. She still came back, as well as some of the other athletes that were in that race. Sarah Colte, who was a staple in the HYROX early seasons, and it was great to watch. I really liked that race, and at the end, Chris really pulled it out. She took a big lead on the farmer carry, or I think maybe it was going into the farmer carry that Viola missed the lap or did an extra lap, and that gave Chris the lead. But Chris was able to hang on, had some great wall balls, and finished it out. Miriam was a big threat in that race because you never knew where she would come from. I think she actually came into the wall balls fifth, and then she was the first woman, well, not the first woman to go unbroken, but she had the fastest wall balls, and I think she still does have the fastest wall balls ever at about 2:55, and that includes, entering the station, grabbing the ball, and going. So she was amazingly quick at wall balls. She ended up having a great set of wall balls, passed Alondra Greenlee, and finished in third that year. It was a great race to watch. I think it went Chris, and then Linda, and then Miriam, and then Alondra. And then fifth, sixth, and seventh were some combination of Sarah Colte and Viola Oberlander. And I'm sorry if I'm missing somebody. I'd have to go look it up. Who else filled in those roles? And Lauren ended up taking 9th place that year. 9th place in Las Vegas. It was great. Las Vegas is where I grew up, so being able to go to that venue and see that, everything worked out fantastic for that. If you want to go back and watch a race, because Vegas is kind of hard to watch, the production just wasn't where it's at now. But in 2022 and in 2023, it really took a big step up, the production in HYROX, and it was fantastic to start seeing that. So one of the favorite races to watch, if you want to watch some really good races, and just like the buildup of the whole season, I think would be the 2021 season. The Elite 12 was in December of 2020, and I believe it premiered on January 1st, 2021, and it created quite a big hype. I would say it was probably at this point in time, the third largest, whoa, hey, here's our production and everything looks good. So after the Elite 12, people were really getting into it, and you saw a big leap up, and they created this invite. So before the invite, they had the virtual championships of fitness, and they were going to invite the winners over to this Dallas race. And I believe the second VCF is where they had the equipment and the no equipment ones. I think Dylan Scott did the no equipment ones, ended up racing in Dallas and doing very well. But that was Dallas 2021, and that's where Rachel Schreiber, at the time was Rachel Schreiber, turns into Rachel Vonderak, where she gets her invite and comes to compete in Dallas. And then Rebecca Hammond. So I believe Rebecca had ran a couple of races before Dallas. But that Dallas race is a great one to watch. Like I said, we usually take time for broad general fitness and improving overall after World Championships. So World Championships was in January. The invite for Dallas, I think, was in March, and so like it was not our big build up yet. So they had a great race. It was a very deep field. Rachel and Rebecca did really well. I believe Corinna Coffin was in there as well. And I think Rachel ends up winning. Rebecca's in second, and Lauren finishes third, and then Corinna finishes in fourth. So great race, fantastic finish. And Rachel cemented herself as, hey, look, somebody who we need to watch coming up. And then later in that season, so that's, if you ever go back and watch the Dallas Invitational, it's a fun race to watch. Not my favorite race to watch, but we'll get to what that is in just a minute. One of my, just in terms of like the sport, favorite races to watch. Lauren ends up going to her first race solo in Orlando, Florida in 2021. Well, after going to Hamburg for the Elite 12. I wasn't allowed to go to that one, but she goes to Orlando, Florida, and that's actually the first place there was ever the grid. If you take out the grid as we know it now, because the grid for the Elite 12 race and Hamburg actually had 3 different sections, but the grid in Florida was basically, they were calling it a time trial. So it was the time trial race, and you would go, and it was a way to standardize it, and they were trying to get it more and more compact and run a bunch of heats on this grid, and it was great. You can't really watch it. I don't see anything on YouTube about it, but that was a fun race to watch. But it was really a confidence building race. At the time, Lauren finished in 66:57, which was a big confidence boost. That was the fastest race to that point. And then, and it was like the 3rd fastest HYROX ever done at that point, maybe 2nd. And then in Chicago, 2021, it was the U.S. Championships. And I think it was the very first U.S. Championships. And it involved basically everybody from that invitational that was in Dallas. You had Rachel, you had Rebecca, you had Corinna, you had Callie, and I think Morgan was there. So there was a big group of people that was really high end in terms of depth, and everybody was ready. And so Lauren goes out, and this is the race. So the U.S. Championships 2021, if you want to watch an amazing like sport race, I would go watch this one. This one, I was at it live, so I actually haven't watched a stream of it in about a year. But watching the race here, it turned out early on that it was definitely between Rachel, Rebecca, and Lauren. And what you had Rachel, who was really strong, and was going to do really well in the first half of the race. And then you had Rebecca, who was smaller and probably going to fall behind in the first half of the race, but was one of the fastest people, and she would really track people down in the back, and she was very dangerous in that like farmer carry lunge section, and actually from burpees all the way to lunges, she was dangerous. So especially with her running weapon. And then Lauren, who was very consistent throughout at the whole time, wasn't going to be as fast as Rebecca, might be a little bit faster than Rachel at that time, or about equal. And so it was setting up for this really big showdown. And then the race goes off. They have a great race, and I don't want to spoil it, but like, go watch. It was a fantastic race. Rebecca had come out early and said that she was going for the world record in that race, and I think she almost gets it. Lauren does break the world record and wins. A record that was set for a very long time. Sarah Colte had set the world record very early on, and it had stood. It was like a 1 hour, 5 minutes, and maybe 33 seconds. It had stood for 500 plus days, a year and a half. And then finally Lauren broke it in Chicago of 2021 at the U.S. Championships, and that's an awesome race to watch. And you can see different and conflicting race styles in that race, and it was kind of more of a strategy race. And I don't think I've ever seen another race that I've watched where the athletes are more spent at the end. Like, you can tell they put everything they had into that race. So it's super special just to see it. And I think it ends up, I believe I learned afterwards that Rachel had like an IT band thing going on, so it was tough to see that during the race, but she did really well still. Rachel ends up in third, gets her invite to Leipzig, Germany, and we were all really excited for the World Championships, because that's where you're going to have Linda, and you're going to have Viola, and you're going to have Lauren, and you're going to have Rachel. And then we learned like Rebecca was going to be super dangerous, but she was going to, I believe, become an attending or a resident or something with her medical career, and she was retiring from OCR and hybrid, and she wasn't coming back. And that would have been a really fun World Championships to have her at. In Chicago 2021, if anybody wants to know about the history of HYROX, we'll keep going. Chicago 2021 was where they had the tornado warning during the event. So earlier in the day, there was a tornado warning, I believe on Lake Michigan or nearby, and they had everybody shut down and cancel and go to these shelters for about half an hour. And people that were in the middle of their race had to stop. And then they got put back at the beginning of their station or run or wherever they were, where their last timing chip was, and then they continued on from there. No fault of HYROX for that, but that was very interesting. And then you had the Leipzig World Championships after that, which is another race you can actually watch. So being able to go back and watch these races, seeing how people race, seeing the different styles and what was important at the time, you can tell that there's different eras of racing. So like season 1 and probably season 2, I'd clump together. That was the 25-meter sleds seasons. They were difficult. The sleds were very heavy and mattered a whole bunch. I would say there was a bigger emphasis on the sleds in those early days than there is nowadays, just because of the requirement, the strength requirement for them during those times. And then the wall balls were a make or break station, and for a lot of new people, they still are a make or break station. But I'd say the top of the men's and women's field, really, it's not as important as it was back then, because back then there could be 5 to 7 minute swings in one station, and people have really gathered that down. And now if you're going to be in the Elite 15, you can't have more than about 30-second swing on any station, depending on who you are and where you're at. So if you're looking to get into HYROX, if you're looking for your hybrid fitness to carry you, I would definitely say that you want to look at these past races, see what people did and how they trained, and then maybe how their training has changed and how their race strategies have changed. That's super important to see, like the evolution of it, and studying, right? If you want to be a good coach or a strong coach to any athletes, or if you're training newbies for the event, I think it's really important that, one, you understand what you're training them for and how to get them the best results possible. And a lot of that is eliminating some of the just underlying mistakes that can be made, tiling it in. A clean race is always going to just help you. You can slow down and it might cost you a minute, but the speeding up and getting a penalty is going to cost you more than that. So understanding how to run a clean race is super important. I got a whole bunch more on the history of HYROX. If anybody has any questions about the history of HYROX, feel free to message me. Otherwise, I think I'm going to wrap up this podcast here. And if you want to learn more about it, you can find me on Instagram at a wild Parasini or the Hybrid Engine. If you want to get in contact with either of us. Right now, we don't have a social media for this specific HYROX or for this specific podcast, but we will maybe over on TikTok or on Instagram. So you can message JK at jk.hybridcoaching, or you can look either of us up on the internet, our website, thehybridengine.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, hi, thanks for taking a peek. You can also see the video on Spotify or anywhere you listen to your podcast, Apple Podcast or iHeartRadio. But thank you for coming, and I will talk to you next week.